Welcome back to the Corporate Governance Program. Our guest today is the project manager of the Corporate Governance Project run by IFC here in Pakistan, Mr. Kaisar Naseem. You've given us lots of information before the break. Now let's talk about, I suppose, what the IFC expects to get out of it, out of a project such as this one. And you've talked about your, I suppose, objectives and how you will measure your performance. What is the real goal the IFC has set itself? Why is it interesting?
Like I said earlier, we're a development institution. And we actually wear two hats as IFC right now because we're dealing with the private sector. The way we help private sector develop is either through providing financial assistance, so we can take an equity position in private sector companies, or we can lend to private sector companies, which means that we are ourselves interested in ensuring that the people we lend to or the companies we lend to have good corporate governance or practice good corporate governance. So that is our motivation, that before we lend money or while we lend money, we actually look at corporate governance, as indeed increasingly institutional investors around the world are looking at. And we'll probably talk about that later, but that is a major criteria now in any investment decision. So that's what motivates us. And the second one is, like I said, a development institution helping develop the private sector. So we need to create a capacity within the private sector to be able to access funding and to be able to contribute towards economic development. And the only way they can access financing right now in today's global economy is if they adhere to international standards and norms of corporate governance.
Kaisar, can I just stop you there for 1 minute, because we're now going to be joining Mr. Hussain Daud, who is the chairman of Daud Group and chairman of many other companies. We're going to get his perspective on corporate governance in Pakistan and its importance. Mr. Hussain Daud, thank you for being part of the Corporate Governance Program.
Thank you for coming here and asking me to be with you today.
Mr. Hussain Daud, what's your perspective on the need for good corporate governance in organizations?
I think that corporate governance is a critical issue for Pakistani enterprise. The SECP did implement a code. The code is excellent. I think it gives a lot of credibility to corporates that embrace it. I think it's very important to have corporate governance because it actually enhances the value of a corporation. Pakistani enterprises have not learned how important that is. Fortunately, we have. And we place corporate governance at the highest levels that we can. We embrace it both spiritually and technically. It's important for us because we feel that the more credibility we're able to create through transparency, through good governance, the greater value that our enterprises will be able to enjoy.
Another key aspect of good corporate governance, I suppose, is succession planning. What's your opinion about the need to ensure that organizations are always looking ahead and planning for succession of key positions, including the chairman of the board?
But those who don't take advantage of the corporate governance do so at their own peril. Their growth curves will be severely limited. I don't think we should work ourselves into any sort of a frenzy about the private or the unlisted companies not implementing corporate governance. We should concentrate on the listed companies. Okay. And let the private company, we need to set sterling examples. When you have examples, then others follow. You might recall that Ford, announced a major decision in the early part of the last century when he said $5 an hour. Now, nobody told him to do that, but look at the impact it had on American industry and American economic development. So we need to realize that we need to develop our economy and our practices through having icons, through idolizing those icons and following them, rather than making through compulsion.
Can you give me your opinion about the role of the chairman for managing the board of directors and how significant you believe this role is?
Oh, certainly, yeah. And the Code of Corporate Governance is facilitating that. Look at the number of companies that now have really developed their boards and the management. You must realize that the most important thing about the Code of Corporate Governance is the recognition that in a corporate entity there are two very important organs. One is the board of directors and one is the management. And it's very important to ensure that one does not interfere with the other.
Yes.
The management inadvertently starts to assume responsibility of the board, and the board inadvertently starts to go into micromanagement. It's very important that the board stays with its responsibility and the management is there. And the job of the board is to facilitate management. It is to empower management. But it is management's job to deliver the results, not the board's.
Mr. Hussain Daud, thank you very much for joining us on the Corporate Governance Program.
Thank you very much.
That was Mr. Hussain Daud, the chairman of Daud Group and many other organizations. Kaisa Naseem, that was a very interesting perspective that Hussain Daud just gave us on corporate governance in Pakistan.
Actually, we've done it around the globe. We've done it in more difficult terrain than in Pakistan. For example, the former Soviet Union, we've had corporate governance projects there. In Central Asia, we have one which is ongoing. We have one in the Middle East, in Egypt. We've had in Latin America, like I told you earlier. So it's been mixed, obviously. I mean, they're very interesting stories. I don't know if this is the forum to talk about them, about independent directors, about boards, especially emanating from Russia,
Okay.
Where, we all know when they came out of this communist mode and they were trying to integrate with the international community, international market. So there were very interesting stories over there. And there we were trying to improve corporate governance of these private sector companies. But in a nutshell, I would say that it has had an impact. The impact may be different for different countries. Obviously, it depends on the level of sophistication of the private sector of each country. But it has had an impact in actually is improving the corporate governance. And corporate governance, let me add it, I think this is the right place to mention it, is not an end to itself. It's not something that you achieve. It's a journey. You will never have good corporate governance. You will always be striving to improve the corporate governance. So it's a journey which is continuing. So from that perspective, I think IFC is also continuing with its journey of helping private sector in all these markets that I mentioned.
Mr. Kaisa Naseem, thank you for joining us on the Corporate Governance Program and providing some very, very useful information. And we look forward to having you with us again as you explain the initiative the IFC is undertaking in regards to improving corporate governance.
Thank you, Smith.
So that was Mr. Kaisa Naseem, the project manager of the IFC project on improving governance in Pakistan. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the benefits that flow to organizations that follow good governance. First of all, good governance is good business because lots of benefits flow to organizations when they follow good corporate governance. For example, good governance practices can reduce risk, stimulate performance, improve access to capital markets. Indeed, the cost of borrowing money could come down, or you may be able to attract more investment if you have good governance and management practices in place. In addition to that, good governance leads to improved leadership. It demonstrates transparency and social accountability. In coming weeks, we'll be talking to some of Pakistan's leading business people about their perspective on corporate governance. We'll be talking to regulators, we'll be talking to investors, and getting their side of the story about the state of corporate governance in Pakistan. So don't forget to join me again next week on Business Plus for another episode of the Corporate Governance Program. Before we go, our special thanks to the International Finance Corporation for their support with this program. Thank you for joining us. I'm Amir Qureshi. We'll see you next week.